All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope that you can hear and see me. I was having a little bit of technical difficulty, and when in an already ambitiously created scope of content that I have planned for my segment, I can't spare any moments. So I am going to dive in. First of all, I want to thank this event for having me, and then having me on a very important topic that I know has consumed many workplaces in the current times we're in, and that's stabilizing and restoring your workplace from COVID-19. We all now are in the throes of either having returned to work or their planned return to work, the work that's imminent. And I'll tell you that, our firm has over the past, several weeks and months, we have spoken with numerous, I'd say safely in terms of the context of all the lawyers at the firm and the consultants that are with our other firm, thousands of employers. And through that, we've distilled just a really good sense of what needs to be focused on from an organizational perspective to make your way through the times that we're in. So just in terms of what we have here for you today, I'm just going to figure out now how to move through my slides. All right, so the session roadmap is this. This is our mission should we choose to accept it. So what I want to discuss is the new workplace realities. So essentially, from a new workplace reality perspective, we're hearing about the new normal and kind of how has the climate shifted? So what I want to do is identify for you just kind of a couple of key themes that should be on your radar that really is evident in terms of how workplaces have shifted, what the impact of the pandemic has been, and what the impact of the other realities of our climate have had on workplaces, including the emotionally charged environment that really is impacting a lot of workplaces that's resulted from the tragic murder of George Floyd in the US. I mean, I do a lot of workplace investigation work. Our firm is right now immersed in numerous investigations as well as reviews across industries, institutional, corporate, public sector, private sector, and this is something that is an overlay to the complexities that organizations are already facing when it comes to returning employees to work and stabilizing and restoring their environment. So I just want to make sure that we cover that and we don't lose sight that this is a huge impact as well that has to be navigated. And then I'm going to leave you with, we'll talk about some common challenges, of course, what has been common themes. And I'm going to also integrate there just some of the legal realities and what's on the legal landscape that has to be navigated from that perspective. And then I'll leave you with some best practices. So in the interest of time, I am going to dive right in and talk about kind of what the new workplace reality is. Well, there have been many shifts. I've identified 5 critical shifts that are palpable and which are definitely identified by us in the context of speaking with all of the employers and business leaders that we have across industries. And frankly, I'm an employer as well. I'm an entrepreneur running 2 businesses. I know these to be the case. First one, topping the charts, leadership uncertainty. We are in a time that is, everyone has been using this word ad nauseum, but it applies. It's unprecedented. So we're in a time where, it's so hard to get our bearings because, we're used to talking in terms of, life being a journey. This is like an odyssey. So this, from a leadership perspective, from a manager perspective, this creates such a great deal of uncertainty, and people that are leading and managing teams, you want to feel certain about certain things. You want to be certain about most things that you're providing direct direction on. And right now, everything is so dynamic and shifting that is something that has been really hard for a lot of workplaces to deal with. Also, culture in many cases has been totally, not even shifted, in some cases has been eradicated from the perspective of employees just are interacting differently. Again, the impact of uncertainty, businesses being, conducted differently. So culture has shifted, and also trust has really been impaired in many cases, in many contexts, because leaders also, again, not necessarily knowing what to say, how to make decisions when, the ground beneath them keeps moving. That can sometimes manifest in mistrust. As well, service delivery expectations from our customers and clients' perspectives, that has certainly shifted. The working requirements, so how work is performed, again, how leaders lead. Many people have had to undertake duties that are new to them, and they really have no sense of how to really meet these requirements, because things are being done on the fly as we kind of recalibrate, and as we have to be agile to get through the times we're in. And employee expectations across the board, as I just mentioned, have changed in many respects. One key respect that I'll mention is just in terms of how work is performed from a flexibility perspective. There are environments that have had flexible and remote working arrangements. A lot of environments are new to this, and it was just out of a matter of necessity that they needed to pivot and take on this new mode of working. And this has created some expectations for a lot of employees who really don't want to return to the workplace. It could be related to the fear of contracting or carrying COVID-19 to their loved ones. But it also is because perhaps they just feel that working from home is more convenient. But this is something that also has to be navigated in the workplace context. And last but certainly not least is the fact that the pandemic impact has very profoundly created what's been referred to as the echo pandemic. So this mental health crisis that has implications and impacts right across the board, because everybody is feeling it to a certain degree, either firsthand, and most of us firsthand to a certain degree, some people very profoundly, but also with respect to their households. So, these are some very critical, significant shifts that we have to really take stock of as we think about, okay, well, how are we going to right course, new course correct from the impact that the pandemic has had? So I said I was going to share some common challenges, and also common challenges from the perspective of how they manifest from a legal perspective, either creating risk or exposure to liability, or just obligations that should be on your radar. I can't start with anything else in this realm than health and safety. Health and safety has been such a profound shift for most organizations, and a common challenge from the perspective of having to keep pace with what is really required to meet that catch-all requirement that organizations have from a health and safety perspective, to ensure that they take every precaution reasonable to ensure that their employees are safe. And, again, for organizations, for workplaces that, employees may don kind of hard hats, steel toe shoes, they've always been a lot more hyper-focused, or ought to have been a lot more hyper-focused when it comes to health and safety. A lot of environments, like more kind of professional services, office environments, where, yes, there are always health and safety obligations, but health and safety really hasn't been something that they've had to be on every single moment of the day in terms of ensuring that there's not any risks in the environment. This has been very hard hitting, and certainly understanding and ensuring that you meet that obligation to take every precaution reasonable has been very difficult, because a lot of organizations don't know how to really embrace the exercise of ensuring that they're duly diligent to mitigate risks. So, for example, with respect to ensuring that you are meeting the requirements and creating a safe workplace that will pass muster from a health and safety perspective, there is a very kind of ingrained approaches that involve kind of looking at a hierarchy of controls as you conduct a health and safety risk assessment. So that's generally looking at, eliminating whatever hazard or risk is present, substituting it, instituting what's called engineering control, so the physical barriers that you would implement within your workplace to prevent the spread or transmission of the virus, as well as your administrative controls, how you ensure that you've got your policies and procedures up to snuff, so everybody understands what their part is, and that that they understand that there's also the overlay of the public health requirements and health and safety requirements that have to be met. And then you get to looking at, okay, well, what PPE, what personal protective equipment needs to be in place? And when it comes to how a lot of organizations have tackled risk assessment when it comes to, kind of COVID-19 risk mitigation, they're starting with PPE. And really, that should be the last thing, because everyone's talking about masks, to wear a mask, not to wear a mask, to don gloves or not to wear gloves. I mean, a lot of the discourse has shifted in itself because there's mandatory mask wearing requirements. But even internally, when you're in the workplace, you're not public facing, a lot of organizations are still grappling with looking at, PPE rather than taking the proper approach, which starts with elimination and conducting the right risk assessment in an appropriate way. So, that meeting the standard has been a common challenge for a lot of employers. Yes, there usually are industry standards that can provide guidelines, but it really has been difficult because health and safety risk assessment done properly is an individual assessment. Also, another challenge has been work refusals. And this has been ongoing. We're continually assisting employers in navigating employees who are claiming that their workplace is unsafe. There are very specific protocols that have to be followed pursuant to health and safety legislation with respect to how an employer and an employee engage in a risk assessment, in a work refusal, addressing a work refusal. But, that has been something that a lot of employers have struggled with. And one of the takeaways that I always leave with is it's not such a bad thing. If you've done your part, it's not such a bad thing if the Ministry of Labor has to come in or deploy an inspector to determine whether or not the workplace is safe. I mean, that's something that can really be helpful if you've done the work you need to do to have that third party sanction the safety of your workplace. But work refusals have been a key challenge. The other challenge from a health and safety perspective has also been dealing with safety challenges when employees are now working from home. And employers recognizing that, okay, we still have these health and safety obligations to ensure that their working environments are safe. How is it that we can have this assurance? And, unsafe working conditions could be, employees still, a lot of this has been rectified, but if they're still working from home, working at a kitchen table and creating, unsafe and hazardous, posture issues for themselves, that may create some disability-related accommodation needs that will need to be handled. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. Another key thing and a challenge that a lot of employers have dealt with from a work-from-home perspective has also been in the area of domestic violence or abusive relationships in the home environment that occur during working time. And this is something that a lot of employers have had to navigate. And there are certain agencies that have come up with certain very assistive practices, such as, giving employees, there's a common sign, a recognized sign now, if somebody is unsafe in their home and looks like this. The thumb in, I believe, is the one that relates to that. And so there are different ways of socializing the employee base that if they have any concerns from a safety perspective that could relate to an abusive home environment, and the employer's obligation in certain jurisdictions, including Ontario, could be triggered as a result for there to be some signs and ways and mechanisms and approaches for this to be addressed. Now, I don't have time to deal with this, obviously with the short segment that I have, but from a health and safety perspective, these are the things that I want to put on your radar. Now, moving on to accommodation. Accommodation is a big area for employers and for the workplace in general. So we talked about how the pandemic has, from an impact perspective, has spawned what has been referred to as an echo pandemic, which is a mental health crisis, and employees require accommodation as a result. And there will be requests related to needing accommodation from a mental health perspective as a result of the pandemic. Where it becomes a challenge for for employers rather, in meeting their obligations, is to what extent is this fear a true mental health condition that requires accommodation, or is it a result of just the general heightened anxiety that we all have in getting ourselves back in the swing of being in the public and proximate to our colleagues and coworkers. So that's an area of challenge that it really needs attention. It really needs deep understanding, because it is something that a lot of employers are grappling with and will continue to grapple with from the pandemic perspective, as a result of the pandemic. Family status, this whole back to school schmozzle that we're in right now with, the school system still sorting out what back to school is going to look like. A lot of households, a lot of families have options where their kids could be working or doing pure virtual studies from home. And that is going to give rise to accommodation requests. And again, family status is one of the grounds under human rights legislation that would trigger the employer's duty to accommodate to a point of undue hardship. And so this also is something that employers have to really carefully navigate. As well, disability generally, there are a lot of refusals to work or needs requests for leave as a result of employees claiming they're immunocompromised, or they may live with someone that's immunocompromised. So they're saying we can't be at the workplace for that reason. We don't want to risk carrying the virus back to our loved ones who we could transmit it to. So, these areas, and again, there are other grounds under human rights legislation that could trigger accommodation obligations, but these areas in particular are really the hot button grounds under human rights legislation that employers have to be aware of and ahead of the game in terms of knowing that they need to address them as they arise in the workplace. And one of the things when it comes to accommodation, there is no blanket application. You have to treat every accommodation request on a case-by-case basis. And a last point to accommodation that is tricky is where you have employees that could qualify for the infectious diseases emergency leave that's under the Ontario Employment Standards Act and similar acts that could be in different jurisdictions, that there is a restriction on asking for medical evidence when you're dealing with disability. So that makes it even more complex for organizations when you need a justification for the leave. But when you're dealing with accommodation generally, and if someone's making an accommodation request, that there is a distinction there, because you do need the medical for the purposes of determining whether or not you can accommodate. So, this is area you definitely need to get some advice and guidance on, but I just want to put these issues on your radar and as common challenges. Layoffs, another issue that is actually very interesting, particularly for Ontario-based employers. I believe it was in late May, there was a regulation that was issued under the Employment Standards Act. And essentially what happened is all of the layoffs that were implemented post March 1, they were converted to leaves. And again, the infectious diseases emergency leave under the ESA. Now, so the employers, these employees were not technically on a layoff. Now, what is very noteworthy and should be on your radar, that because we've had the end of the state of emergency in Ontario, there is this conversion of layoffs to leaves is only a temporal thing. And it ends 6 weeks from the end of the declared state of emergency. So as of September 4th, the layoffs will be reinstituted for those employees who were originally on layoff. And very important to note, because one of the things that a lot of employers didn't know and didn't realize was that when it comes to layoffs, which employers had to elect as an option, particularly those that had to shut down entirely, one of the things that what ended up being asserted is, well, now employer, if you haven't reserved the right to lay off under an employment agreement, you have effectively constructively dismissed me as an employee. And that means that I am entitled to whatever termination entitlements I would be owed. Now, this is something that might very well escalate more and more. So there'll be more litigation around whether or not these layoffs, if employees are now back to layoff status, if the employees are going to challenge employers. So this is something I want to have you on your radar because it's something that certainly needs to be navigated. And then conduct issues. So conduct issues have been a real sleeper for a lot of organizations because early on in the pandemic, there were a lot of behaviors out of kind of heightened anxieties and maybe just some, I would say, kind of joking in certain environments, insensitive joking related to people that were being associated with, let's say, the early spread and transmission of COVID-19. I mean, just all misguided. But these jokes, any shunning, any behaviors that would be considered offensive towards coworkers, that created risks for employers from a harassment perspective and under health and safety legislation, but also discriminatory harassment to the extent that it connects with any of the grounds of discrimination under human rights legislation. So what we were seeing more and more of is employers being so distracted, trying to get their legs to stabilize, that they were just not addressing these issues. But the risk that you have if you do that is you could be seen to be condoning the behaviors and complicit as a result. So this could lead to some real exposures to liability. But now added to that, post the triggering event, which is, and I'm very careful to say this because there have been many similar events prior to George Floyd's murder in the US and since, but that really happened very visibly in a time where we were undistracted. So there has been, and I'm telling you because we're doing so much of this work for organizations, there has been this eruption of employees essentially being intolerant right now and saying, we want you to fix issues as it relates to equity, discrimination, and inclusiveness in the workplace. And, this is something that is complicating, but necessary in organizations right now. So you have to be mindful of that because the climate has really changed. And so that is something as well that has to be addressed very meaningfully and impactfully. Otherwise, your return to work and stabilizing and restoring efforts could be made in vain. So in my last remaining minutes, I just want to put just a few things on your radar. I've got 8 quick best practices I'm going to go through in fairly rapid fire because I just have 3 minutes remaining. So first of all, from a best practice, practical strategy perspective, you want to make sure you engage in effective and meaningful return to work planning. This isn't kind of move the shells around type of deal. It has to be meaningful. And I don't have the time to share it. Through our website, which is williamshrlaw.com, you can access our COVID-19 resource center. We have documents there, informations, videos that really talk to how do you go about effectively returning employees to work. And if you already have, there's still, monitoring, getting feedback, and, all the things you need to do to ensure employees feel safe to return. And that's going to be critical because that's the best way that you can preempt some work refusal or other type of resistance to rejoining and re-engaging in work. Secondly, you want to make sure that you communicate expectations regarding return to work. A lot of employers are not doing a great job at doing so. They may have some return to work date that's postponed. And when I say return, work may be being performed now, but in terms of plans for everybody to come back under one roof at the employer's brick and mortar. And the longer that you postpone and don't very overtly set expectations around when there will be a return to work, the issue will be that employees are going to have expectations that return to work may not be in the cards, and they may make demands to stay at home. And it also makes it challenging the longer employees stay at home, if that's not your ultimate intention as a workplace, because as employees make accommodation requests, and if their accommodation request is to work at home, you're going to receive the challenge of, well, why not? Why can't we do this? We've been doing it for how many months now? Acknowledging uncertainty is another one. Everybody knows there's no silver bullet answer. So it's better to just say, look, we've got things in the works. We're working towards, whatever it is that you need to make decisions around. Everyone gets right now that, nobody has all the answers, but you have to just stay communicating. It's so important. You want to make sure you set your expectations through policies and procedures. This is another way you can preempt a lot of resistance to returning to work, and make sure that your workforce is well aware of what the expectations are. As well, you want to monitor progress in return to work efforts, solicit feedback, very important, and also make sure you have a contingency plan and that it's well communicated. Because one thing that everyone is anticipating is there's going to be a second wave, there could be a third wave, and so you want to pre-socialize what contingencies are in place should you have to stand down your operation in the event that there is a further wave of the pandemic. So I have gone through a lot in a very short period of time. As I said, we have a COVID-19 resource center that's accessible through williamshrlaw.com. It's been great sharing with you. I wish we could be in person this year, but this is certainly one of our new realities. And I just wish the best to all of you and hope you continue to enjoy the content through the conference.